You're listening to Depth Perception, supported by our patrons on Patreon. Leo here with a couple content warnings. We're going to be talking about the history of witches, so we briefly talk about systemic violence against women. It's at least present in the context of the conversation. There's also one moment when we allude to anti-Semitism. The content of this episode is pretty self-explanatory. Witches. Witchcraft. Here's our show.
Hi, I'm Randy. Welcome to Depth Perception.
And I'm Leo.
And today we are going to be talking about witchcraft and magic. We're going to start off with the witch cult hypothesis, which is a theory that was pretty prominent in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, before it was largely debunked in the 70s and the 80s. But it has remained in the popular consciousness, I would say. It's pretty common in portrayals in media of witchcraft. It makes up a lot of what I assume must be my misconceptions of Wicca. And it is the theory that there was a single pre-Christian pagan religion that consisted of fertility rituals, of a particular kind of magic that I think we don't often associate with being what magic is, and we'll get into that later on. But it's the biggest thing that I took away from it is that in my research, like, it really didn't seem like magic and witchcraft. It's not what you think it is. It's not casting spells and laying curses on people. A lot of it is just things like homeopathic medicine, like, fertility rituals, again, that are common all over the place. All across the world there are fertility rituals. There are gods of fertility. There are, ceremonies involving, things from animal sacrifice and human sacrifice to dances and music and song. And it's the thing that I took away from it was that witchcraft and that kind of spirituality and that idea of magic is a lot broader than I would have thought a few weeks ago, before I bought books such as The Witch Cult in Western Europe by Margaret Alice Murray, such as The Discovery of Witchcraft by Reginald Scott, or the Malleus Maleficarum. I was surprised by a lot of the things I learned, because you learn about the witch trials in school, and I don't think Leo and I necessarily are going to have a lot of positive things to say about school, but one of the things is that this stuff is kind of presented as just, the Inquisition, the witch trials, things like this are presented as just. I mean,
Or at least just by the standards of the time. Not
but those
to people.
but that's one thing, is that we give a lot of leeway to cruelty of the past, and
Yeah,
I think just kind of the tone of how these things are presented in textbooks and therefore are presented by teachers and things, they kind of want you to moralize in that way. They want you to be able to extrapolate those things into life as it is now. We look at people that, what is even the word? Engage in Wicca? Is that what I would say?
I don't know the correct, if there's a single verb. Practice Wicca.
Practice Wicca.
There's
That's
probably a
good.
cool Wicca
Is Wicca
verb, but I don't
even
know.
is Wicca even a relevant term, or is that like pop culture, like shaping what I think about it, or
I
is
think
it
people
is it
use
like a
Wicca,
fringe
Wiccan.
teenage group?
No, I think it's real. I think it's the correct term. I mean, I have an aunt or I had an aunt who was a witch and used the term Wicca. Yeah, did various rituals her whole life,
I
spells
don't
and
know.
stuff.
There's this like normative current of thinking that these sorts of things are silly or ridiculous. At Halloween you have like silly toy witches that animatronics and things. You have the Blair Witch Project. You have which we watched. I suppose since this is a sequel of sorts to the last episode, it's only appropriate that we watched a Destination America video before this, where they ran into a Blair Witch sigil in the woods, and pretended as if as if it was unseen and unheard of before. But the most recent exposure that I've had to a new idea about witchcraft, because I've over the last couple of years I've kind of formulated my own ideas about witchcraft and magic that run counter to that normative current. And we will talk about magic later. But as far as witchcraft goes, like I don't think it's any scarier than any other religion. I think it's probably less scary than other religions, especially over the last couple of days, having learned about it as we think of witchcraft as entailing things like black magic, like I said earlier, destructive spells or curses or inflicting diseases upon people. I think a lot of that actually may have to do with like what people thought about Jews in the Middle Ages in Western Europe. I didn't consider that until just now, but in a lot of things I've seen regarding the Black Plague, like it was blamed on Jews and things like this. They people believe that the Jews had powers, like supernatural powers or paranatural powers. And obviously most negative things that achieve sort of a pop culture status, like the perception that most people, I would say, have of witchcraft. They're all just like bias based and not information based. And I think a lot of this comes down to the kind of Puritan attitude that is still very prominent in the Western world. Maybe more so just America. I can't speak to Western Europe and all of that, but
Yeah, I
America, I'd
got
say,
one
is
for
still.
that.
Go ahead.
I remember when I was a kid and one of my close friends, I was like really into Harry Potter at the time, and I was like, did you read Harry Potter? And they were like, no. And I was like, why not? And they were like, it has witchcraft in it. And I was like, shocked. Even at the time, I was like, that's absurd because these kids are the most into Lord of the Rings of anybody that I know now. And as kids, they were too. And like, but they're like at that age, like I don't know. I think it might have been their school or somebody had or their parents. I don't know. Somebody had told them like don't Harry Potter's witchcraft like. And I think that like puritanical attitude of like people just saying like, oh, that's that way, that has witches, like that has the word witch in it, or whatever. Israel, it's sort of like it's sort of the reason you can just say that and not go any further. It's not just because of Christianity. It's also because when you learn about the Salem witch trials in school, yeah, they imply that like the courts failed, but two things they don't do. They don't question the legitimacy of the courts after they've committed this horrible atrocity. They don't go, kids, like, do you think that the court's existence is justified after they did that? And they also don't do this. They also never will say, do you really think that like if they had been like doing magic that they should have been punished? Like there's never any nuance. They allow you to completely keep intact the idea that witchcraft is bad without provoking any thought on the matter. And then, years later or whatever, when someone tells you Harry Potter's bad because it has witchcraft in it, you don't have the critical thinking to go like, "Oh, well, but didn't they kill all those witches?" And then we talked about it in school, and like maybe there's more of a question than just like did they actually do it? And you know what I mean? Like it's just like, oh, did they do it? No, they didn't do it. So like so like they shouldn't have been killed. Like that's the conversation. That's all that we have.
I think we can separate the kind of puritanical patriarchy. I think we can separate that from Christianity, in the sense that it's a power structure that a group of men conceived of, and just because of the time period that they were living in, and the culture of England at the time, they were able to put women and young girls under the yoke of this power structure. They were able to raise their sons to continue this power structure because we talked about it a couple episodes ago. If you are in a position of power just by virtue of the accident of your birth, why would you, especially in a time when there are even greater systems that protect you as the patriarch in that power structure. The church is going to protect you, the courts are going to protect you. Why wouldn't you go with it? I mean, I'd like to think I wouldn't. I'd like to think you wouldn't. I would like to think all of the men in my life wouldn't. But I also have to assume that we probably would. So why wouldn't you do that? And so I think a lot of this anti witchcraft stuff, I don't think it has to do with the notion that the Christian religion is superior and above the this in their minds pagan belief. Like, I don't think they could care less. The Bible doesn't, contrary to what a lot of people think, the Bible says that there will be no God above me. It doesn't say that it's only me. I mean, there's all kinds of room for the idea of witchcraft and paganism in Christianity. So I think it's important to separate things like the Inquisition and the witch trials from Christianity, because what it really was in support of a power structure, and they had to put a stop to what I interpret, and I think a lot of scholars on the subject probably interpret as a feminist movement. Have you ever seen The Wicker Man, starring great actor Nicolas Cage?
I have not.
Well, he's a man that is a police officer that goes to an island, run by a matriarch. It is it's like I think they're like a druidic sect. And you know, what they do is like it's painted as really bad, really cruel. There's men with the men have their tongues cut out. The Nicolas Cage character is lured to the island to be sacrificed for for one of these fertility ceremonies. You know, and there's plenty of examples of it in popular culture. The movie The Witch by Robert Eggers, I think, really is good at countering the normative current about witchcraft. I'm not going to spoil that movie because that's really good and people should watch it. The Wicker Man is trash. Nicolas Cage is terrible at what he does. And that movie is especially bad. But yeah, so I think the trend that we've had for a lot of years of the idea that witch hunters are cool good guys in from fantasy games, from fantasy movies, to books. I mean, even I bought the Malleus Maleficarum because it's a witch hunter's manual. It turned out to be a little bit more woke, at least in the bit that I read, than I expected it to be. Much like the Discovery of Witchcraft as well. Which was nice. It was refreshing that those books were a little bit more grown up than what I expected them to be. But yeah, I just think it's important to separate the idea that Christianity, I don't think that had anything to do with persecuting witches.
Mm-hmm.
I think if people were doing what the doctrine said, like, or what the book said, they would have left them alone and let them, go about their business.
Yeah.
I think the entire snafu of the witch trials and the Inquisition, and even up till today, the Crucible, which we read in school.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to say about that because I don't remember much of it. I remember the guy getting crushed under the stones.
Yeah, that's the part I always think of first too.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that was probably more about McCarthyism than it was actually about the witch trials. I think it was.
Right.
I think it was analogous, but I think this stuff is done and is continued and is propagated as anti-feminist, patriarchal status quo, propping up the status quo.
Oh yeah, I recommend that anyone who's interested in this topic go watch that Philosophy Tube video. Also, Witchcraft, Gender, and Marxism. Great little half-hour delve into this topic.
Yeah, I didn't watch that video, but Philosophy Tube is a great channel.
Oh yeah,
and I think he can be trusted to say something smart about the topic.
Also, he makes a similar Jordan Peterson joke in that episode to the one that we made last week. So, shout out to
Which
you,
is always
Wally.
good. So we've talked about the witch cult hypothesis, and we've talked about witchcraft as a feminist movement and anti-witchcraft things as patriarchal status quo stuff. So why don't we move on to magic, which I think is going to be the large part of the conversation in this episode.
Magic can always be. Magic isn't really one thing, I think we have an idea of magic. It's definitely tied up in witchcraft, where there's the conjuring tricks that maybe people do to entice you, make you believe, make you see what they can do as sort of maybe much more mysterious than it might actually be. I'm not saying all people who practice magic do this, but I'm saying historically, the sort of the conjurers weren't necessarily separate from the people who were doing also, real healing, um, including witches. That's my understanding of it. But that being said, there are plenty of people now, and there were plenty of people, you know, in times when people widely believed in conjuring that didn't do conjuring and also were healers, magical healers, and or just could do magic for themselves, did magic to help make sense of their own world. And again, healing, when I say healing, we're healers for all kinds of people in all kinds of ways, whether it be literally like herbal healing coupled with perhaps some kind of magical ritual to psychologically, as we would say in modern times, to put it in modern terms, to psychologically augment sort of the effectiveness of the herbs, or just or or people who practice things like, excuse me, that maybe today would be more identified with hypnosis or therapy, involved in altering the course of action of a person with their consent or not. But the point I'm trying to make is a lot of practical day to day magic seems not to have been organized into a religion, as was suggested in the witch cult of Western Europe, and probably was, as we were talking about, like constructive magic, not usually demonic magic aimed at, calling the forces of something dark.
Yeah, black magic.
Yeah, black
Yeah,
magic.
and the healing thing, it covers so many things. This this magical stuff that is demonized. You know, it could be everything from midwives in a time when medicine wasn't really understood, or like Leo said, hypnotists, shamans, all sorts of things. Like magic takes a lot of different shapes all across the world, which in and of itself is kind of enough to debunk the witch cult hypothesis. Which I think it did pretty well for its time. I think it was like pretty progressive for its time, but ultimately, like I think that idea may have led to a lot of the things that we think of now uh, when we demonize magic. We associate the Church of Satan with you know black masses and dark magic. There's like a kind of new age spiritualism that has kind of supplanted maybe what something like the witch cult hypothesis was actually trying to get across. I think it was co-opted to be something that it probably wasn't uh, when it was developed as a hypothesis. Um, and so I think
Well,
the
there's one way to
efforts.
look at it. There's one way to look at it as which is as a working of magic itself. Like whether this was her intention, she basically created a historical narrative that was then used by people to like. I don't know that people. I don't know that neo pagan like witchcraft Wicca today would be as strong as it is without having that history, because it really seems like that history that she put forward, the potential history of witchcraft as sort of like the remnant of this now obscure but united religion, like that allowed for people to have to allowed people to participate in a tradition, and allowed sort of like that religion, allowed it to spread as a modern religion, whereas it really wasn't ever anything that took the form of modern religion. So this anachronistic idea gave people something that they could, it it brought the possibility of something to being called Wicca and being a religion in the modern sense into
Right,
fruition.
right. Wicca has become like the big post-Christian pagan religion, as opposed to the pre-Christian pagan religion that is supposed by the witch cult hypothesis.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
It's like a response. Like I feel like it still is like feminist. Like I think it is like at its core a feminist movement, and I think that's why when we think about it, we think of people who are a little bit silly, right? Not because feminists are silly, but because we're made to think, the way that TV portrays people that are Wicca, is kind of,
And feminists.
and feminists, yeah. But I think the I think the damage doesn't happen when they go at feminism as a whole, because then you can say, well, that's ridiculous. It's easy to say that people who target feminism as an entire movement, it's easy to say that they're silly. But if you grew up reading the books and watching the movies and the cartoons where magic is silly, and witches are silly and they gobble up little kids in the woods and things like this, when you're presented with Wicca as an idea, you're going to say, no, that's silly. I know what magic is, and it's gingerbread houses and putting kids in the oven, and it's ridiculous. I think it's that kind of sabotage that leads to people being willing to look down on feminism altogether, because you can pick at different elements of it, right? It's the same with any belief system or ideology or philosophy. You can't just take the thing down as a whole. Sometimes you can. There's some that that's like the best way to do it.
I think it just depends on
But
the age group and the political.
well, because the thing
leaning
that
too,
popped
just
into
in
my
this
head
space.
was Nazis.
Yeah. Mm.
You don't need to, pick apart at little things about Nazism to be able to deride it as an ideology. But feminism, like, if you're thinking about it and you're being actually thoughtful and not just Jordan Peterson thoughtful or Kevin McInnes thoughtful, like, if you're thinking about it, there's not a reason in the world to be anti-feminist.
Right.
But, I can see, as someone that is not, like, witchcraft is goofy, someone that doesn't think that, I can see why people would think that because of the things that we're presented with.
Yes.
Whether
Yeah.
it's Harry Potter or,
Harry Potter is fucking goofy.
Hansel and Gretel, we don't get a nuanced look at witchcraft. Like, you have to go looking for it. You have to read, like, weird books and go out searching for esoteric knowledge that most people aren't going to do. They can't be expected to do. I probably wouldn't do it if I wasn't doing this podcast. But I suppose I also wouldn't be doing this podcast if I wasn't, like, searching for esoteric knowledge. Leo and I have spoken before about magic as like an impression of will,
Yeah.
right? An
Yeah.
extension of the will. Um, we talk about the law of attraction as magic. We talk about other things that Leo can give me examples of as magic. Um, and there's all kinds of magical things. I mean, like if you ever watch like a Southern Baptist congregation, speaking in, like what else is speaking in tongues? When people like convulse and throw themselves around the pews and everything. Like what else is it
Absolutely.
but magical thinking?
Yes, which is it's a great pivot right here actually. Magical thinking. So the Hermetic tradition, magic is this like sort of Gnostic philosophy that strives for wholeness, and that's cool. And I like aspects of that. I don't really like Gnosticism. I think that dividing everything into light and dark is kind of lame and probably not helpful. And that since we live in a very racist society, I think that there's real implications to doing that all the time and like letting yourself just think of things in terms of literally black and white. Um, I'm not saying that's the reason for racism and that if you're a Gnostic or whatever, you're a racist. I'm just saying it's kind of it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how literally it gets taken up by certain occult magicians. Uh, anyways, enough on that. Magical thinking, though, in general, is cool. When I was little, I had pretty bad OCD, and I thought if I washed my hands a certain number of times, or if I, put the door just right, my day would go better. That's magical thinking. Um, Wanting so badly for there to be a causal situation in front of you that gives you control that you just concoct one and this weird slippery thing between intuition, left brain, right brain, to use the sort of traditional uh, maybe outdated sort of ideas, like there's the creative and the deductive sides of you sort of fighting and like trying to but they're both like trying to like fight your anxiety in different ways, and they end up creating this weird, you just seesaw between this very sort of supernatural and intuition and this very like sort of rational uh, response. It can suck, but it also is like it's fertile ground for you know I think maybe certain types of coping mechanisms that aren't toxic. You know what I mean? Like um, we do things like this all the time in our daily lives. Like what is a funeral but some form of that, that's very socially accepted and ritualized. Like you have a way that people say, oh, this is going to help you, deal with the loss, and like it does for a lot of people to go to a funeral. Um, or just really any social ritual. Certain things in language, like um, there's even something magical just about like, well, I mean, depending on your speaking as a not really a religious person, talking about praying, like putting intention into the world, which is similar to will.
So if we were to define magic, we would try to break it down, right? We would define hermetic magic, or we would
Mm-hmm.
define Gnosticism, or black magic, or fertility magic, or whatever. You could pick any subset. But if you were to define magic as a whole, would you maybe say that it is a procedure with the goal of what, catharsis?
Catharsis, or I guess I do like the idea of wholeness because I think that you can appropriate that from, or you can expropriate that out of sort of the Gnostic and Hermetic tradition of magic and be
Mm.
like, no, even if you want to do away with sort of like the duality aspect of it, wholeness is a good goal.
Mm.
I think wholeness is good. Um, I think it's sort of been, it can be, maybe chaos magicians would talk about like you can just use magic for whatever and you don't have to have any long term goal. But it's either the on a small scale the bending of the will or the channeling of the will towards certain ends, or sort of as a practice it's like the channeling of the will more generally towards wholeness, like towards that goal for yourself and perhaps
Mm.
for the world around you as well. I'm not really sure. So it's compatible with a lot of other sort of ways of being.
I think I only know this term from Full Metal Alchemist, but like this sort of equivalent exchange, right? You know, where a life is given, or what did they? Didn't they in Hellier? Didn't they like burn like regional like local tobacco to appease a spirit that they were trying to contact?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this idea of like in a lot of cases you seem to be giving something up
Or it was
to
homegrown tobacco, maybe.
maybe, yeah, but you're giving something up that matters
Yeah.
to um kind of reckon with whatever, whatever you think you may have done wrong. Like I don't mean to say sin in the Christian sense, but just in the idea of what the word means. To atone for a sin, maybe, to or when you sacrifice a life in the interest of having a good harvest, right? There's this kind of balance that I've been interpreting, at least in the magic that I've read about most recently.
You know what? I want to riff a little bit.
That's what I'm doing.
Using the word balance just flashed me back to last weekend. Hosmic and I were hiking at Buttermilk Falls near Ithaca, and we found this big tree that was down, and we like balanced on it, and it was like crammed between these two other trees in a really interesting way, and you could be like up like 6 feet off the ground if you walked along the trunk. And so we were doing that, and Hosmic was talking about how like balance to her is when sort of like sure-footedness when you're out hiking is something that sort of like you develop through practice, and if you let it sort of lapse for a little while, at first it's hard, but you develop it back up again pretty quickly. And I told her like, oh, I totally agree. Whenever I go out on a hiking trip and I haven't for a year or whatever, I always feel that at the beginning of the trip, or when I go skiing, there's that little period of like it's difficult and you develop it again. And that period of both when you're developing the skills initially and you're expanding your skills with like, climbing and stuff like hiking, clomping around, you feel this sort of dialogue between, it's a little bit like it's between you and yourself, but it's also between you and just sort of this unnamed thing as you sort of slowly incorporate aspects of the the world around you into yourself, into your ability to know. And I think that's a little bit what magic is about too, and doing that. I was just listening to Ramsey Dukes on this other podcast, and he was talking about like using what works. And it's kind of like that. It's like using what works. What worked about, you know, hiking last time, and when did I feel out of balance? And maybe I'm thinking, oh, I hope I have a chance to sort of like, expand that skill. And then I'm not quite paying attention when that chance comes. And because I wasn't paying attention quite in the right way, I do something instinctively. I step on a rock a certain way and I say, oh, you know what? I didn't know that I could lean that far over that way until I had to do it unexpectedly. And now I have that under the domain of my will. That feeling of balance and dialogue, sort of a language between you and something. So if it's you, if it's nature, whatever, I think it explains why we have to do things like appease. Like when you have an abundance, for example, of a crop, you found a way to sort of stabilize yourself and maybe even make yourself independent from what previously would have been reliance on will to gain food or whatever. No wonder you have this urge, this almost guilt maybe. I'm riffing now, but you have this guilt almost I have this food and it came easy to me. I didn't have to rely on will because I've spent the time to learn sort of a shortcut. But that will is still out there, maybe looking for me or waiting to dialogue with me. And in order to, and I'm still accountable to it. I still owe a lot to it, or the people that came before me owed a lot to it. And therefore, like, I need to leave something out. Maybe, especially when I have to go ask a favor to it, that muscle is worn out. I have to get myself into the psychological space of being able to dialogue with it. And also just because I owe a lot to it in my past, like even when I don't actively need it, like I still need to acknowledge its presence out there outside of me.
Think about the word oneness, right? And what we have an idea of what that means to us. But when you think about binary, right? 0 is no, and 1 is
Yeah.
yes, right? Or you can think of it as, if zero zero is nothing and 1 is anything, right?
Yeah.
Right. If you're trying to like achieving oneness, I don't think has to mean singularity, right?
Are you talking about oneness in this sort of like as a synonym for what I was calling wholeness?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
sure.
It doesn't it doesn't have to be singularity. It doesn't have to be like the complete unification of everything that there is, right? You can just be it can mean anything.
Yeah.
Anything greater than nothing, right? So maybe there's this idea that like you know you can create something, whether it's if you I imagine if you have like an old bull or something, and it can't reproduce anymore, so it's not serving its function in the herd, and it's not helping the community, right? It's essentially worthless. I mean, you have the obvious things that you can glean from it, but it's not productive anymore, right?
Yeah.
So it's 0. So sacrificing like this thing that's not worth anything to you, you know, in the hopes that you'll be granted, more that you can sacrifice. There's this like kind of cycle of yes and no, of nothing and something, that like kind of repeats like thematically throughout different at least in the belief systems that I've been reading about, which do tend to be Western European. Um, I don't mean oneness in like the Buddha's enlightenment, right? I don't mean it like that, but this idea that you're passing on things that aren't of use to anything, or aren't of use to you anymore. You're it's like hand me downs, right? You pass on your hand me downs and you get new clothes. You know, does that add up?
You're kind of talking about almost like paying it forward to the universe around you. Like,
Yeah, like like when you make a sacrifice, right?
yeah.
You're a lot of times you're not going to give the most useful thing you have. Like that's more of something that you're giving like in terms of a tithe, right? That's I wouldn't call that the same as a sacrifice. Um, you know, you're offering something, cuz you know, say if you're offering a goat to the devil's not going to come and take it. I mean, I can say that almost for certain. I'm almost certain of that. I'm not 100% certain, but I can bet the devil's not going to come and get it. But it's the offering that I think is the thing that I am surprised about the most in what I've been reading about witchcraft, right? Because when you go to church and you pay the tithe, you're expecting something. You know, you're expecting that because you're paying into the church, because you're going to church, you're expecting that you're going to get into heaven.
It 100% like taps into like your guilt. You're it's you know because you feel a little bit good when you donate to an institution that represents to you the path towards eternal happiness. So of course, yeah, of course, if, there's no way to not be like slightly coerced when you like pay a tithe to a church, or there's no. At least what I'm saying is the church relies on most people being a little coerced, especially the Catholic Church historically. Holy shit. Um, um, yeah, I talked to one of my coworkers today. Was talking about how his grandma used to practice voodoo and how his dad thinks that basically the way that voodoo works is like you he was talking about a situation where like somebody puts a curse on you or a hex on you, like, and if you're conscious of the hex, like, it's gonna change your behavior and kind of act. The way that I rationalized it when I was talking to him was like hypnosis, and he was like, yeah, kind of like that, like you're, maybe, a curse that you're going to meet a certain end a certain way, like get hit by a car, and somehow the knowledge of the curse and the way that it's put on you, if you're susceptible to things like magic, weaponizes your worry about it happening against you and brings it about. And I thought that was interesting. And even more interesting than that was that he was talking about, because he was listening to some kind of he was listening to like old episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, and there's this one about like a woman who got taken advantage of by a medium for like a period of months. She was paying a lot of money to, and how magical thinking, the medium gave her all of these things in her life to do, and how she thought it was great because it put control back into her life. He was talking about how like he couldn't believe that she was so trustworthy of a medium who she was paying. And he told me that one time when he was in New Orleans, like there's this woman outside of a bar who was like, "Hey, you want a palm reading?" And she like didn't ask for any money. Like he had encountered people multiple times while in New Orleans who would do like fortune telling free of charge, just as a thing that they did. They would just sit outside, and the first time he was like, I don't want to pay for anything. And she was like, no, like I'll just read your palm. And he was like, for real? Like, she was like, yeah, it's fine. So I at least trust the person who's doing that more than I trust the church when they come around and ask me for donations. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if I don't believe in it, I trust the intentions.
Right, because it's this idea that you're giving something freely,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
I was listening to this podcast, and the guest was he was formerly a missionary to Latin America,
Yeah.
and he obviously was a Christian missionary, and he was fascinated with brujeria, which I think most white Americans would associate with devil worship and black magic and all this.
Yeah.
And so he was talking to this old bruja, and he had asked her like, so why are you make why would you make a covenant with the devil? He seemed like he was pretty genuinely, or he was pretty genuine when he was saying that, like, I wasn't asking her because I was trying to convert her. I was asking her because I was interested. I wanted to get the answer. Why would you make a covenant with the devil? And she was saying, we don't make offerings to the devil to enter a covenant with him, to bring him here. We make offerings to the devil to make sure he's happy where he is. You know. I think that definitely colored my perception of magic after I heard that it's about giving freely, to maybe reap the benefits of it.
Yes.
In
This is
in
so, yes.
It's because, like, I think you don't expect anything when you're doing that. You don't expect it. You're just crossing your fingers, right? You're crossing your fingers, again, magical thinking.
Yes.
It didn't even occur to me until now. It's something I do probably every day. It's exactly what I was saying about the tithe. You give a tithe, or you pay for an indulgence from the Pope or whoever you paid for an indulgence, because you're expecting to get something out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that is the difference between something that I would call an organized religion and something that I would call, a personal religion.
Right.
Even like when you have the you look at what was his name? The Witch's Sabbath painter.
Oh, Francisco de la Goya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I look at that painting, or I see the Witch's Sabbath in the excellent movie The Witch, like, I don't feel like I'm looking at organized religion. I feel like I'm looking at, like, a communal ceremony of people that have their own beliefs and their own motives and their own methods and things. And I don't know, to me, witchcraft and Wicca and, well, I don't know. I feel so bad because I do kind of almost think Wicca is silly. But it's because I don't know enough about it. But there, to me, it's like more genuine belief than when they pass around the collection plate and you drop money in it because you know you have to, and it's the easy way to secure entry into heaven or whatever. Pick anything like that.
Yeah.
Just in the same way that I will believe the fortune teller that offers to read my palm or read dregs or something. I'll believe the person that's doing that for free. I probably actually will just believe it. Somebody that offers to do, to read tarot at me or to me or about me or however it works. Somebody that's just offering to do that. I'm going to be more taken by that than I am going to be the person that says, if you pay me, I'm going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Because that to me that's just a way to make money. That's not, I believe this and I want to share my belief with you and bring you into the world that is like, that kind of does exist like in just, I don't know, maybe it's the foreground or maybe it's the background. I can't quite tell. But there's like something that we don't quite see when we choose to have like a two-dimensional view. Like Western religion is all about above and below, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this kind of other thing that is it even religion? Is witchcraft even religion? I feel like it's not above and below. I think it's ahead or behind. I feel like I feel like it pulls at you from a different angle.
Yeah, that's so wow. That's really articulated that, but I totally know what you mean. I 100% agree. I do think of Western religion as being organized sort of like vertically. Well, it is.
It is, yeah.
And reflecting vertical power structures. Like it shares that with like things like patriarchy, things like kingdoms. Like it shares that sort of cosmological organizational principle. Even things like the world tree, like older ideas. But things like witchcraft are like more diffuse and sort of horizontal, extending out to the sides of me. Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, what is a word that you would associate with a group of witches?
Coven. I don't know.
That's exactly the word I have up in my other tab here. So the definition of the word hierarchy is a system or organization in which people or groups are ranked one above the other according to status or authority. Okay. Definition of the word coven is a secret or close-knit group of associates or a group or gathering of witches who meet regularly. So even structurally, like you were saying,
Yep.
right? Structurally, like thematically.
Yeah. When I hear those definitions, one of them is explicitly about, stacking people up based on categories, and they're discrete
Yes.
categories. Like status is not a thing that is based on merit, really. It's status. It's independent from that. Whereas when I hear the definition of coven, I imagine people coming together from all sides, coming to form a group. And that's an inherently like horizontally organized thing.
I just flashed Leo my copy of the Divine Comedy, which, if I'm right, that is about somebody traversing. How many layers of hell are there? Is that right?
7. I think that they go through paradise and purgatory too.
Yeah. So but essentially, it is somebody traversing, you know, the hierarchy presented in Western theology, which is Christian. That's the only Western religion that is prominent, I would say. Yeah, and so this entire thing like harkens back to the come down on witchcraft is it's a hierarchical power structure tearing down a collectivist group, right? I mean, there's no head witch that I've never read about, like the leader of a witch coven.
Right.
It's always presented to me as people that are equals.
Even in like the weird distorted dramas about
Yeah.
the
So
weird
even
distorted like depictions of witches, yet don't have that
exactly,
either.
even when they're trying, they
Exactly.
can't convince me that it's bad. Even when they're trying, they can't convince me that something bad is happening.
It's kind of like it's kind of like, as basically an anarchist, it's kind of like when you look at what anarchists want the world to be like, no one just hierarchies, only hierarchies, that fill a need, and just sort of the principles an anarchist wants a society to be organized around, or, many types of communists as well. They're basically the values that like we're taught as kids should be present in groups and societies. That when we play with our friends, we practice these values. Yet when we grow up, they're distorted, and all these exceptions are added on. But basically, when you look at the way that like a coven of witches is depicted in fiction, like it looks like it's like a council. It's like a fair democratic body where everyone has a say.
Exactly.
Same thing.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I mean. Even like just because of the way that maybe I choose to think this way, or maybe I couldn't think any other way but this way. But like I said, they just cannot convince me that I'm looking at something bad. I'm looking at, The Wizard of Oz tries to tell me about a wicked witch, but really, like, the bad guy is the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
The wicked witch is like, yeah, she's the antagonist maybe because she's against Dorothy and the Tin Man and everything, but like the bad guy is the guy that they take like the Gilded Road to go see, and that has like the great kingdom and everything, and is like, he is the autocrat.
He also is the guy. Yeah, he's a technocrat, really.
Okay, yeah.
He has that crazy technology.
I can't pretend like I remember a lot of details about the Wizard of Oz. I don't even think I named all 4 of the characters.
Tinky Winky, Dipsy, Lala, and Poe.
So to wrap up the episode about witchcraft, what I would say is do research about it before you say that you don't believe in magic, or that you think that witchcraft is ridiculous, or that you try to dismiss it as like folklore that doesn't really have a place in the world anymore.
But also, even though any one of those behaviors is a learned behavior, I think there's something completely natural about accumulating those behaviors. Whether it's trust you have in the cup of coffee or tea that you're going to have and how it's going to make you feel, or the time that you spend every day walking and what it means to you in your life. Reflect on how you feel those things affect your life, and sort of appreciate the magical act in just doing these things for yourself.
Thank you for listening to Depth Perception. You can support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, kicking us a little bit of scratch on Patreon.